Hey everyone, Tony here. Just thought I would share today the oldest cards in my collection. And these are not sports, but they're still pretty cool. These are from 1904. So these are the oldest cards in my collection, 120 years old. And these are from the Taddy and Company. This was a British tobacco company, cigarette company, and this is from the Russo-Japanese War set. And these cards, I have four of them. They depict the Emperor and the Empress of Japan and Russia, respectively, the two warring nations. So I'll give you like a little bit of a sneak peek here, and then we'll get into them more so up close. So yeah, if you didn't know, at the beginning of the last century, Japan and Russia actually went to war. This was not a super well-known war. It's one of those more sort of forgotten wars, maybe more like a Korean War or more so than like a World War II or a Vietnam, right? Like, so it's not really one that's super taught in Western schools or anything like that. But yes, Russia and Japan is starting in 1904. It lasted 1904 to 1905. We're at war, and I'm not going to get into the war in a lot of detail just because I'm not terribly well versed in the history of the war. I know the basics, but also just for time and things like that. But the Cliff Notes version is that basically at this time, Japan had been rapidly industrializing and modernizing, and Japan was kind of flexing its muscle in the region, and Russia, as another imperial power, uh, that extended, to the Pacific Ocean from Europe, right to the Pacific Ocean, as anyone who's decent at geography knows. Russia was also kind of trying to get a foothold in the Asia Pacific region and kind of like establish itself firmly there. And basically, this war erupted between Japan and Russia because of this kind of imperialist friction. So anyway, the war broke out. It was about a year long, and Japan won, which really shocked the world. This was the first time in modern times that an Asian country had defeated a Western power in a war, and it was definitely had some ripple effects. It sped up the end of Imperial Russia and kind of helped bring about the Bolshevik Revolution and things like that. And it also established Japan. Japan had kind of arrived as a world power at that point. Like I said, it had been rapidly industrializing and modernizing. And this was kind of the moment that Japan sort of arrived as a big player on the world stage. So I want to, I guess what I'll do is I'll go through the ones that I'm not going to talk about quite as long first. So this set is about 50 cards. And as I said, I have four cards here. So this card is of Tsar Nicholas II. You might know him as the last Tsar of Russia. Of course, the Romanovs were overthrown during the Russian Revolution, and of course, you might also know what happened to poor Nikolai and his family. They were gruesomely murdered, bayoneted, shot. His country's loss in this war against Japan did not help his position. But Nicholas II, last Tsar of Russia, and the Empress of Russia, Alexandra. So these two, not going to spend quite as much time, so just a nice quick look there. So the rest of the set, as I said, I have the Emperor and the Empress of Japan and Russia. The rest of the set is pretty much high-ranking military officers from Japan and Russia, so generals and admirals mainly. I would like to get the set, but it's actually one of the more not super affordable non-sport tobacco issues from around this time. Most of the cards I found go for like at least $10. And there's like 50 cards in the set, so it's not like super. It's not like one of the super cheap ones, maybe more on the pricey end for something like this. But anyway, so the guy I really want to talk about most in this video is this guy. So this is Emperor Meiji of Japan, the victorious emperor in the Russo-Japanese War. Emperor Meiji, I would say, although it's kind of a lame analogy, Emperor Meiji could kind of be considered almost like the George Washington of modern Japan. He's kind of the father of modern Japan. So a little bit of background. Before Meiji's reign, basically, Japan had been for about 250 years. Japan had been ruled by a powerful warrior clan known as the Tokugawa clan. And at the top of the Tokugawas were the shoguns. You've probably heard the term shogun. You're probably like at least a little bit familiar with it. It basically means general. The shogun was the top warlord, and then he had sort of subordinate warlords known as daimyo. And then they were served by samurai, sort of rank and file samurai and other retainers. So basically, it was this powerful feudal dynasty, the Tokugawa clan, that ruled Japan for about 250 years. They defeated all their enemies. There was a very unstable and warring period in Japanese history that preceded this period called the Sengoku or Warring States period. But the Tokugawa clan came out on top, and they ruled a united Japan for a very long time. And although during this 250-year period, Japan was stable and peaceful, it was also very isolated and not super technologically advanced. It was this isolated agrarian society. And then as time went on, oh, and by the way, so at this point, although the shogun actually ran Japan, actually ruled Japan, there still was an emperor. So Japan still had an emperor, but he didn't really have any power. He was kind of just sitting in his palace in Kyoto writing poetry or whatever. So did not really have any power, although they still had an emperor. So then as time went on, as the decades and things went on, eventually around the time of the end of the U.S. Civil War, so we're talking mid to late 1860s-ish, there were increasingly elevated tensions between basically warrior clans, domains that were loyal to the Tokugawas, the clan in charge, and then there was another faction that was actually becoming, their stance was that they wanted to see the emperor restored to power, to actual political power, right? So they were in favor of basically ousting the Tokugawa shogun and restoring the emperor to actual power in Japan. And so basically, this culminated in a civil war. Basically, war eventually broke out between the forces loyal to the emperor and the other warrior clans, the domains loyal to the Tokugawa shogun. So there was a civil war in Japan. The imperial forces won, and the Tokugawa shogun was overthrown, and the emperor was restored to actual power. And that's this guy, Emperor Meiji. This event, this civil war, and then the subsequent political and social reforms are known collectively as the Meiji Restoration. And so, just a little bit more about this guy to put him into some context that you might most readily understand. Emperor Meiji is the grandfather of Emperor Hirohito. Emperor Hirohito in quotes, of course, the World War II emperor. This is his grandfather, Emperor Meiji. And I put Emperor, as a side, I put Emperor Hirohito in quotes because his name is not actually Emperor Hirohito. That's kind of a Westernism that follows a Western convention of kind of given name, Christian name with, title. So in Japan, he is actually known as Emperor Showa. Emperor Showa is Emperor Hirohito, the grandson of Emperor Meiji. Interestingly, Meiji follows the Japanese naming convention even in like Western sources. I'm not sure why the difference, but yes, Emperor Hirohito, his grandson, is actually Emperor Showa, the World War II emperor. But as an added layer of, he was not known as that during his life. The Japanese emperor during their lifetime is basically just referred to as His Majesty the Emperor. He's never referred to. But then after he dies, he is given a kind of posthumous name, coinciding with the name of his era. So the current emperor, it's the Reiwa era in Japan. He will be Emperor Reiwa when he dies, but that's not his name. His name is Naruhito, and he is known as that. But anyway, a little bit of a digression. So Emperor Meiji, the grandfather of Emperor Hirohito, and he is really, the country that Japan is today as a very modern, and things aren't still economically powerful, fourth biggest economy in the world, and things like that. That really is still the legacy of Emperor Meiji, who after his victory in the Civil War against the Tokugawas, instituted reforms of politics and society and kind of rapidly modernized and industrialized Japan, and in some cases westernized Japan, which also caused some friction, and another mini civil war called the Satsuma Rebellion, but I won't get into that. So yeah, Emperor Meiji. I also have his wife, and this is the Empress of Japan. She is now known as Empress Dowager Shoken, but her actual name was Masako Ichijo, but she is known as Empress Shoken. And actually, she was pretty interesting. She was something of a, I don't know if like she was like a genius as a kid, but she was like a very smart woman, and was kind of a Renaissance woman. She was kind of good at lots of different subjects, and was a pretty precocious child and things like that. She was also, when she was empress, she was active in the Japanese Red Cross. So she did a lot of work with the Red Cross. But fun fact about her, well, it's not really that fun. Despite all this, she could not bear children. So she had no biological children with Emperor Meiji. However, Emperor Meiji, back in those days, the emperor had concubines, and Emperor Meiji already had a bunch of children by different concubines, and the Empress, Empress Shoken, or Empress Masako, adopted his eldest son by a concubine, and was his adopted mother. So, of course, a little bit different from. So that's Emperor Hirohito's father, right? So a little bit different from the Western system, right? Meiji, in Western monarchies, right? If the monarch had a son by some side action, that son would be a bastard, and an illegitimate son, and would not be allowed to take the throne one day. He wouldn't be in line, right? Illegitimate child. But in Japan, it was a little different. So the emperor had official concubines, and these women were of high status, right? They weren't just like randos. They were noble women themselves, but that was a court position, being an official side piece for the emperor was actually quite an honor, and children born to them were not illegitimate. And like in this case, right, the empress, although she could not have children of her own, she adopted one of her husband's sons, and that son was the Taisho Emperor, who is Hirohito's father, the current emperor's great grandfather. And Meiji is the current emperor's great great grandfather. So, anyway, John 3D80's kid, you might have a Hirohito rookie card, but do you have a card of his grandpappy? So Emperor Meiji, very consequential individual in Japanese history, to say the least, and probably the most consequential Japanese emperor of all time. I would go as far as to say. One more thing, though, before I uh, sign off. I also have a silver coin from the Meiji period. So this is a coin issued very early on in Emperor Meiji's reign. So I have here a 50. This is a silver 50 sen coin. So back in the day, Japan used to have two currency units, sen and yen, right? So we all know yen, but sen was, so it's a little bit like dollars and cents, and this was a 50 sen coin. 100 sen was one original yen. Under the old system, this coin is about 80% silver, I think. On the front here, it says 50 sen. So it says 50 sen here. And then it says Japan over here, or maybe more accurately, Greater Japan. And then it says Meiji 3, meaning the third year of Emperor Meiji's reign, which in Western terms was 1870. So this is very early in the Meiji Emperor's reign. This is a silver coin. I think about 1870. So, if I remember right. All right, so that's what I've got for you guys today. As always, thanks for watching. Peace.